The strangest thing about our family photos wasn't who was in them. It was who wasn't. I noticed it on a rainy Sunday evening in October, though the evidence had been hanging on the walls of our family estate for years. The old Harrison dining room glowed beneath the crystal chandelier as golden light reflected off polished oak and silver serving trays. Family portraits lined the walls from floor to ceiling, each one carefully framed, carefully preserved, carefully displayed. And somehow, none of us had ever asked the question that would eventually change everything. My name is Ethan Harrison, and at 24 years old, I thought I knew my family. I thought I understood the quiet tensions at the dinner table, the unspoken rivalries, the cold glances exchanged when certain subjects came up. I thought I understood why Harrison sat silently at the far end of the long oak table every Sunday night, watching everyone with those weathered blue eyes that seemed to know more than they ever revealed. That evening felt ordinary enough. Isabel was pouring wine beside David, her elegant movements effortless as always. David looked exhausted in his dark suit, distracted by problems he never fully explained. Eleanor sat beneath the chandelier, smoothing the sleeve of her pastel cardigan while avoiding eye contact with almost everyone in the room. James moved quietly between courses with the practiced efficiency of someone who had served this family for decades. Outside, rain tapped softly against the tall windows overlooking the grounds. Inside, conversations drifted between business, investments, and family obligations. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming. Then I stood up to refill my water glass and paused beside a large portrait hanging near the staircase. It was a family photograph from years ago. David looked younger. Eleanor's hair was darker. Harrison appeared stronger, less burdened by time. But something felt wrong. At first, I couldn't explain it. Then I noticed an empty space. A gap. A place where someone should have been standing. I stepped closer. The composition felt unnatural, as though everyone had shifted slightly to one side. I glanced toward another photograph hanging nearby. The same thing. Another gap. Another strange arrangement. My stomach tightened. Over the next 10 minutes, while everyone focused on dinner, I quietly studied every family portrait I could see. Graduation photos, holiday gatherings, charity galas, anniversary celebrations. Different years, different locations. Same pattern. The same empty space appeared again and again, almost as if someone had once existed there. Someone who had later been removed. I returned to my chair, unable to stop thinking about it. The conversation around me faded into background noise. Finally, I looked directly at Harrison. He was already watching me, not surprised, not curious, almost as if he knew exactly what I had discovered. I set down my fork and broke the silence. Who was standing in those photos? The room froze. Isabel stopped pouring wine. Eleanor's face lost all color. David stared at his plate. Even James paused near the fireplace. No one answered. And in that silence, I realized I had just uncovered the one question this family had spent years trying to avoid. For several seconds, nobody moved. The grandfather clock near the library entrance continued its steady ticking, each second sounding louder than the last. I had expected confusion, maybe even laughter. What I had not expected was fear. Real fear. Isabel recovered first. She set the wine bottle down carefully and offered a polite smile that did not reach her eyes. "You are imagining things, Ethan," she said. "Old photographs get damaged. They get restored. Sometimes details change." Her answer sounded rehearsed. Too smooth. Too quick. I looked around the table. David still refused to meet my eyes. Eleanor seemed fascinated by the folded napkin in front of her. Harrison remained silent, his weathered hands resting calmly on the oak table. The chandelier light reflected across the crystal glasses, creating small flashes of gold across the room. "Then why does it happen in every photo?" I asked. Isabel's smile disappeared. Nobody answered. Dinner ended shortly afterward. Conversations became forced. Chairs scraped against hardwood floors. James cleared dishes with his usual professionalism, but even he seemed distracted. One by one, family members disappeared into different parts of the house. The atmosphere felt wrong, as though I had opened a door that had been locked for years. Later that night, long after everyone else had gone upstairs, I returned to the dining room. Rain still tapped softly against the windows. The house felt enormous in the darkness. I stood beneath the portraits again. This time I studied them carefully. In one photograph from a Christmas gathering, David appeared to be looking towards someone standing just outside the visible frame. In another, Eleanor's hand rested awkwardly in midair, as if it had originally been placed on someone's shoulder. The more I looked, the stranger everything became. Around midnight, I walked into the east hallway where dozens of additional family photographs were displayed. The same pattern appeared there too. Missing space, cropped edges, unnatural positioning. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures. I wanted proof that I was not imagining any of this. As I photographed the final frame near the staircase, I heard a floorboard creak behind me. I turned. James stood in the shadows near the library door. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he glanced toward the photographs before looking back at me. There was something unusual in his expression. Not surprise, not concern, recognition, as if he had been expecting this moment for a very long time. "Some questions," he said quietly, "have been waiting years for the right person to ask them." Before I could respond, he reached into his jacket pocket and removed a small brass key. Then he placed it on a side table beside me and walked away without another word. I stared at the key for several seconds. Attached to it was a faded paper tag with 2 handwritten words that immediately made my pulse quicken. Archive room. I stood alone in the east hallway for nearly a minute, staring at the brass key resting in my palm. The paper tag looked old enough to have been attached decades earlier. Archive room. The words felt strangely familiar, although I could not remember ever hearing anyone mention such a place. The Harrison estate was enormous, built long before I was born, with corridors, storage rooms, and locked offices that most family members rarely entered. Yet something told me this room was different. James had not handed me the key by accident. He had been waiting. I slipped the key into my pocket and crossed the silent house. The grandfather clock in the foyer showed 12:23 in the morning. Rain continued falling beyond the tall windows. The entire estate seemed to be asleep. After several minutes of searching, I found a narrow door hidden behind a section of built-in bookshelves near the rear library. The brass key fit perfectly. The lock clicked. A cool draft greeted me as the door slowly opened. The room beyond was smaller than I expected. Shelves lined every wall. Boxes, albums, binders, and labeled storage cases filled the space from floor to ceiling. A single desk lamp sat near the back, casting a warm circle of light across stacks of carefully organized records. Nothing appeared abandoned. In fact, everything looked meticulously maintained. Someone had been preserving these materials for years. I moved toward a shelf marked family photographs. My pulse quickened. The first album I opened contained holiday pictures from more than 20 years ago. I turned pages slowly. Christmas mornings, summer barbecues, charity events, birthdays. Then I stopped. There, smiling directly at the camera beside a much younger David, stood a girl I had never seen before. She appeared to be around 8 years old, with light brown hair and bright eyes. In another photograph, Eleanor had her arm around the same girl. In another, Harrison stood beside her during what looked like a family gathering on the front lawn. She was everywhere, page after page, year after year. Not a visitor, not a neighbor, family. I checked the back of one photograph. Written in faded blue ink were 4 simple words. Lily, summer of 2001. My stomach tightened. Lily. The name meant nothing to me, yet somehow she had once been part of nearly every important family moment. I sat down at the desk and continued searching. The deeper I looked, the more impossible the mystery became. Someone had not simply disappeared from family photographs. Someone had disappeared from family history itself. And for the first time, I began to understand why everyone at dinner had looked so frightened when I asked that question. The clock on the desk showed nearly 2 in the morning before I finally closed the last album. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving only silence around the estate. I sat motionless beneath the small lamp, surrounded by evidence that should not have existed. Every photograph told the same story. Lily had not been a distant relative. She had not been a temporary guest. She belonged here. She appeared beside David during birthdays, school events, summer vacations, and holiday dinners. In one photograph, Harrison stood behind both children with a rare smile on his face. In another, Eleanor was helping Lily decorate a Christmas tree. The more I looked, the more impossible it became to understand how an entire person could simply vanish from memory. Then I found a box labeled personal correspondence. Inside were greeting cards, handwritten notes, and school papers. Most were ordinary. But one folded document immediately caught my attention. It was a program from a middle school academic award ceremony. The names of students were printed neatly across the page. David Harrison appeared near the top. Directly beneath his name was Lily Harrison. I stared at the paper for several seconds. Harrison, not a visitor, not a family friend. The surname was there in black ink. Lily Harrison. My pulse quickened. I searched deeper through the box. More documents appeared. Report cards. Summer camp registrations. A piano recital flyer. The same name appeared again and again. Whoever Lily was, she had once been recognized publicly as part of this family. Yet somehow, nobody had spoken her name in years. Near the bottom of the box, I discovered a framed photograph wrapped carefully in protective cloth. I removed it slowly. The image showed Harrison seated on the front porch many years earlier. David stood on one side. Lily stood on the other. Harrison had one arm around each child. What struck me was not the photograph itself. It was the expression on his face. I had known Harrison my entire life. Reserved, careful, difficult to read. Yet in this picture, he looked genuinely happy, as if nothing in the world mattered more than the two children beside him. That was when I heard footsteps in the hallway outside the archive room. Slow footsteps, deliberate footsteps. Someone had stopped just beyond the door. A shadow appeared beneath the narrow gap at the bottom. Then came a gentle knock. Before I could answer, Eleanor's voice spoke from the other side. Quiet, tired, almost defeated. "Ethan," she said, "if you found her photographs, then it is finally time for you to know what happened." When I opened the door, Eleanor stood alone in the dim hallway. The soft light from a nearby wall lamp highlighted the exhaustion in her face. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she glanced past me toward the shelves filled with albums and documents. Her eyes settled on the framed photograph still resting on the desk. "You found her," she said quietly. I nodded. Eleanor stepped inside and closed the door behind her. The small room suddenly felt even smaller. She moved slowly toward the desk and carefully picked up the photograph of Harrison with the two children. Her fingers lingered on the frame. "There was a time when this picture sat in the living room," she said. "Visitors used to ask about them all the time." I waited. Something told me she had carried this story for years. "Who was Lily?" I finally asked. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly before answering. "She was family." The words hung in the air. "Then why does nobody talk about her?" A sad smile crossed Eleanor's face. "Because some people believed silence would make the past disappear." She sat down across from me and folded her hands together. Outside, the first hints of dawn were beginning to brighten the windows at the far end of the hallway. The night was slowly giving way to morning. "Lily came into this family when she was very young," Eleanor continued. "She and David grew up together. They attended the same schools, shared holidays, shared birthdays, shared everything." I looked down at the photographs spread across the desk. The evidence matched her words perfectly. "What happened?" I asked. Eleanor did not answer immediately. Instead, she studied the old photograph as if searching for courage. "A decision was made," she said at last. "A terrible decision. Not because Lily had done anything wrong. Not because she was unwanted. Quite the opposite." My confusion only deepened. "Then why remove her?" Eleanor's eyes filled with regret. "Because someone became afraid of what the truth might reveal." The room fell silent again. Somewhere in the estate, a floorboard creaked. The old house seemed to be listening. Then Eleanor reached into her cardigan pocket and removed a folded envelope. The paper was yellowed with age. She placed it carefully on the desk between us. Across the front, written in Harrison's unmistakable handwriting, were 6 words that immediately sent a chill through me. "To be opened if Lily is found." My hands hesitated over the envelope. The paper looked fragile, as though it had been waiting years for this exact moment. Eleanor remained silent across from me. She did not tell me to open it. She did not tell me to leave it alone. The choice was entirely mine. Carefully, I broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. The handwriting was unmistakably Harrison's. Strong, precise, controlled. The first line immediately captured my attention. "If you are reading this, then someone has finally started asking the questions nobody else was willing to ask." I continued reading. Harrison explained that the truth had been hidden for so long that many people inside the family had eventually convinced themselves it no longer mattered. He wrote that silence can become its own kind of prison. He wrote that protecting a secret often causes more damage than revealing it. Then I reached the paragraph that changed everything. Lily had not left the family willingly. She had not disappeared. She had not been forgotten. She had been removed. Not physically, not legally, but socially, deliberately, systematically. Harrison described years of family pressure, private meetings, and decisions made behind closed doors. He never mentioned every name directly, but one detail appeared repeatedly throughout the letter. Certain people believed Lily's existence threatened the image of the Harrison family. They feared questions. They feared scrutiny. They feared truths that could not be controlled. I looked up from the page. Who made those decisions? I asked quietly. Eleanor stared toward the shelves. More people were involved than you realize, she said. Some acted out of fear. Some acted out of loyalty. Some simply followed instructions. The answer only deepened the mystery. I returned to the letter. Near the bottom, Harrison revealed something else. Lily had never stopped trying to reach the family. Over the years, letters had arrived. Holiday cards had arrived. Updates about her life had arrived. Most family members never saw them. My chest tightened. What happened to those letters? Eleanor closed her eyes. For the first time since entering the archive room, she looked genuinely ashamed. They were intercepted, she whispered. The room suddenly felt colder. Somewhere above us, the old house groaned softly as morning sunlight began filtering through distant windows. Then I reached the final page. Harrison's last paragraph was shorter than the others. Just a few sentences, yet they carried more weight than everything before them. If the truth ever comes out, find Sophia Bennett. She has the documents. She knows what was taken, and she knows who ordered it. Beneath those words was a date from 3 years earlier and Harrison's signature. I stared at the page in silence. Whoever Sophia Bennett was, she clearly held the next piece of a story that someone had spent decades trying to bury. By the time the sun rose over the eastern lawns of the estate, I had not slept at all. The letter remained open on the desk beside me. Sophia Bennett. The name echoed in my thoughts. Around 7 o'clock that morning, I left the archive room and drove into town. The address I found belonged to a small law office located inside a restored brick building near the courthouse square. It looked ordinary, almost forgettable. Nothing about it suggested that answers hidden for decades might be waiting inside. Sophia greeted me herself. She appeared younger than I expected, composed and professional, with the calm confidence of someone who had spent years handling difficult truths. The moment I mentioned Harrison's letter, her expression changed. She studied me carefully before inviting me into a private conference room. Once the door closed, she opened a locked cabinet and removed 3 thick folders. I hoped this day would eventually come, she said quietly. My pulse quickened. Sophia placed the folders on the table one at a time. The first contained legal correspondence. The second contained trust documents. The third contained copies of letters that had never reached their intended recipients. I spent the next hour reading in stunned silence. Lily had written repeatedly over the years. Birthdays, holidays, family milestones. Her letters were thoughtful, respectful, and hopeful. She never sounded angry. She never demanded anything. Again and again, she simply asked for a chance to reconnect. Yet attached to many of those letters were notes showing they had been intercepted before reaching most family members. Someone had ensured that her voice never entered the conversation. Then I discovered the trust records. Several pages contained revisions made more than 20 years earlier. Names added, names removed, provisions altered. One signature appeared more frequently than any other. Isabel. I stared at the documents in disbelief. She had this much authority? I asked. Sophia nodded slowly. More than most people realized. My thoughts raced back through years of family dinners, business meetings, and carefully managed conversations. Suddenly, certain memories felt different. Certain silences felt deliberate. Certain decisions felt orchestrated. Sophia folded her hands on the table. The family believed they were protecting their reputation, she said. But eventually the secret became larger than the reason it was hidden. I looked down at the final document in the folder. It was recent, very recent. A current address, a phone number, and a name I now recognized immediately. Lily Harrison. For the first time in more than 2 decades, finding her was no longer impossible. 3 days later, the Harrison family gathered once again beneath the crystal chandelier in the old dining room. The atmosphere felt different from any dinner I could remember. Nobody seemed comfortable. Nobody seemed relaxed. Word had spread that I had been asking questions. Harrison sat at the far end of the oak table as always, his expression unreadable. Isabel appeared perfectly composed, but there was a tension in her posture that had not been there before. David looked exhausted. Eleanor remained unusually quiet. Even James seemed more watchful than usual as he moved through the room. This time, however, I was not alone. Sophia sat near the center of the table with several folders neatly arranged beside her. Thomas, the family attorney, had also been invited. His presence alone was enough to make everyone uneasy. Dinner progressed through the first course with polite conversation that felt completely artificial. Finally, Harrison placed his fork down and looked toward me. "You have something you want to discuss," he said calmly. The room became silent. I took a slow breath. Then I placed several photographs on the table. Original photographs, unedited photographs. Photographs showing Lily standing beside the family members who now pretended she had never existed. Nobody spoke. Sophia opened the first folder. Inside were copies of letters Lily had sent over the years. One by one, she slid them across the table. Christmas cards, birthday messages, family updates, evidence that Lily had never stopped reaching out. David stared at the documents in disbelief. "I never saw any of these," he said quietly. Sophia nodded. "That is because they never reached you." The silence that followed felt heavier than any argument could have been. Then Thomas opened another folder. Trust records, correspondence, internal memoranda, years of decisions preserved in writing. The documents revealed a pattern that was impossible to ignore. Information had been controlled. Communication had been restricted. Certain truths had been carefully managed. David slowly turned toward Isabel. For the first time, she seemed unable to find the right words. "Why?" he asked. The question hung in the air. Not angry, not loud, just honest. Isabel looked around the room. Toward Harrison, toward Eleanor, toward the portraits lining the walls. Finally, her voice softened. Because once it started, nobody knew how to stop it. Across the table, Harrison closed his eyes briefly. The secret that had shaped decades of family history was no longer hidden. And for the first time, everyone in that room was being forced to look directly at it. The following Sunday, sunlight poured through the tall windows of the Harrison estate for the first time in what felt like years. The house looked the same from the outside. The stone walls, the iron gates, the manicured grounds all remained unchanged. Yet something inside had shifted. Secrets that had survived for decades could no longer hide in silence. Shortly after noon, a car turned slowly into the circular driveway. No announcement was made. No dramatic introduction was needed. Everyone knew why we were there. Harrison stood near the front entrance, his weathered hands resting on the head of his cane. Eleanor waited beside him. David remained unusually quiet. Even Isabel seemed smaller somehow, as though the weight of the past had finally caught up with her. When the car door opened, a woman stepped out. She looked older than the photographs I had studied in the archive room, of course, but certain features were unmistakable. The same eyes, the same smile, the same presence that had appeared in dozens of forgotten family memories. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then Harrison walked forward. Slowly, carefully. The distance between them was only a few yards, yet it seemed to contain 20 years of silence. When he finally stopped in front of her, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Welcome home, Lily." Tears filled Eleanor's eyes. David looked away and wiped his face. No speeches followed. No grand explanations. Just people standing together and facing a truth they should have faced long ago. Later that afternoon, the family gathered on the back lawn overlooking the gardens. James carried out an old wooden box from storage. Inside was a camera that had belonged to Harrison for years. The same camera used for countless family photographs. One by one, everyone took their place. Harrison sat in the center. Eleanor stood beside him. David moved to one side. Lily stood on the other. The rest of us filled in naturally around them. Nobody adjusted the arrangement. Nobody shifted positions. Nobody worried about appearances. For the first time, the photograph reflected reality instead of a carefully edited version of it. As the camera clicked, I glanced toward the old house. The walls still held portraits from the past. Some would need to be replaced. Others would need to be restored. But that no longer seemed impossible. That evening, after everyone had gone inside, I found Harrison sitting alone on the porch with the new photograph resting beside him. He studied it quietly for a long moment before looking up at the fading sunset. "People think the truth disappears when you hide it," he said. "It does not. It waits." He smiled softly and looked back at the photograph. This time, nobody had been left out of the frame.